Okay, I would like to call to order our 4 p.m. board workshop on the 5-year master's facility workshop. We have a few board members that have just stepped out, but they will be in shortly. Dr. Ross, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, and welcome to our board workshop. This is our opportunity to look at our 5-year master facilities plan. As a reminder, the reason that we do this is under our general powers of the board to provide suitable schoolhouses in this district to make them comfortable, paying due regard to the buildings that we already have, but also to make sure that we promote the best educational interests of the district. So with that in mind, our goal is to create a prioritized list of capital projects for the school district and these projects will be funded within 5 years when the plan is approved. As you remember, we had 7 questions that we were working our way through. We completed the grade structure of how the district would be organized. We have done an enrollment analysis for projections for each school. We looked at the academic programs to determine our instructional priorities. In today's meeting, you will hear our recommendations for those items that are in progress. The desired enrollment for our elementary, middle, and high schools and utilization rates. You'll hear our minimum conditions that we are planning to meet for all of our schools. And you'll also see we'll end with our rezoning/redistricting plans. So the purpose of today is just to hear the information that we have provided, to solicit initial feedback, but know that the board will need time to review this data to get community input from our plan. How is our plan created? Well, we use some guiding principles to help us with answering those 7 questions. If you can recall, we did community analysis and enrollment projections or forecasts on September the 11th. We had MPS come out and do our facilities conditions assessment on October 23rd. On November the 13th, we had our instructional plan review, and then we talked about our financing plan on December the 11th. This was us strategically going through all of these elements to make sure that our plan was completed and had the adequate data to ensure that its viability. If we look at our enrollment and community analysis, that we see that, and if you look at 10 years ago, or roughly 10 years ago, the 135th day data from 2013, you'll see the enrollment distribution of students within our community. And if we look at what happens 10 years later, maybe missing a slide here, but we see that it increases in the Chapin area. As a result, we had our facilities conditions report. This was measured on a scale of 5 points, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, with 3 representing average wear and tear of a facility. When we look at our facilities in the facilities in our community, you can see that we are prioritizing those facilities that average a score of 2, with yellow being replaced within the 3 to 6 year range, but represents normal wear and tear. So our priority is those buildings that have a score of 2. So that brings us to a specific question that we have here. Do we A, build more schools in the Chapin area, or B, fix the existing schools in the Dutch Fork and Irmo area? What's important to note is both options will require rezoning of students. So as a result, our goal was to fix, fill, and finance the schools. Again, instead of building more schools in the Chapin area, fix and fill the existing schools that we have in the Dutch Fork and Irmo area. So to rezone, we have a new redistricting map This is draft 4 that we'll reference. Our goal, pending the approval of this plan, is to begin this redistricting on the 2026-2027 school year. How does this work? As we shared, to move to this sustainably, we need one additional building. Our recommendation is that new building be Dutch Fork Elementary School. We take the current Dutch Fork Elementary site and convert that to the Rich Lex Community Education Center. If you're not familiar with Rich Lex, that was a school that existed in our community. I think the last year was in operations in 1968. If you can remember what high school you graduated from, we have some people in our community, their high school is no longer here. Their school is no longer here. It is our goal to bring that name back and bring it back to its original location. Its function would be to house the Academy for Success, which is in Spring Hill, the Adult Education Program, which is in Irmo, and the 5 program, which is in Piney Woods. By taking those programs out of those schools, we can maximize the seats in those existing schools and house them at the new Rich Lex. Also bringing back a name in our community that has been gone since 1968. At the high school level, we would have, and what you'll see in our plan, is that we keep, to a large degree, our high school structure. Even in the rezoning, the majority of the students will attend the high schools that they currently are zoned for. Chapin High, 9 through 12, Spring Hill High remaining a magnet school, Dutch Fork High School, and Irmo High School, all 9 through 12. Where we start to see the changes at the middle level, where the current Chapin Intermediate School going to Chapin Middle, 6 through 8, the current Chapin Middle School going to Spring Hill Middle, 6th grade through 8th grade. Same with Dutch Fork High School, Dutch Fork Middle being 6 through 8. The Crossroads Intermediate transitioning to Crossroads Middle, 6 through 8, and Irmo Middle School going 6 to 8. This is different from the draft 3. As we look at balancing the numbers, you can see how Chapin Elementary and Piney Woods move into Chapin Middle, Lake Mary and Ballantyne move into Spring Hill. Essentially, instead of building a new elementary in Chapin, we'll be using the Ballantyne building as a new Chapin feeder. Dutch Fork will take in Oak Point, River Springs, and Dutch Fork Elementary, and H.E. Corley would move as a feeder with Leap Heart and Seven Oaks into Crossroads Middle. All of Harbison West, Nursery Road, and Irmo Elementary would go into Irmo Middle School. Now, our options, we provided at our last meeting options to fix, fill, and finance this move. We're recommending option B, to take all 2 rated buildings, add security upgrades, to fill them in our draft 4 model, which would require building a new Dutch Fork Elementary School and renovating the Rich Lex School. With our current financing position, we heard from our financial advisor that this would give us $240 million and would be the same tax rate as that we have right now. And so as we looked at those options at our December meeting, our focus is option B. So what we'd like to do now is share the details of the school assignment plan, how we came up with the options, and then present the final proposal for redistricting. To do that, our Director of Accountability, Dr. Van Holden, will come forth and show us give us an overview, the math, and the renderings for the rezoning plan. Dr. Holden.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Is it? There it goes. Thank you, Dr. Ross. As Dr. Ross mentioned, I'm here to talk about our potential options here to bring draft 4 into reality for our new educational structure. As we get there, I want to take you through a couple different pieces about how we arrived at these conclusions or how we came to the decision to make these recommendations to you here this evening. First, we're going to be looking at the current elementary school map and the school assignment plan. We'll then be looking at the implications of applying that current map to the new grade structure. For whatever reason, this is not advancing. I don't know what's going on. This isn't advancing. I can't. No, sorry. It's okay. Switch it out. Oh, there. Now it's going. Sorry. Sorry about that. We'll be looking at the implications of using that same map with the current grade structure, and then we're going to look at some options for redistricting for the district. We conducted an analysis here looking at grade structure 3, so a draft of the educational structure 3. That's how we arrived at 4. And I want to walk you through our findings from looking at draft 3. We looked at elementary, middle, and high school enrollment. And we looked at this map in particular. This is the map that was created with the opening of Piney Woods Elementary School. Okay? So this is the map we're looking at for the first few slides when we talk about the findings. Now, there are some limitations to how we approach this. I'm not a professional demographer, so the enrollment information we're looking at here is if we took the existing students who were in our district and we plotted them according to where they live, and then we moved them up 1 grade level for 24-25, or 2 grade levels for 25-26, or 3 grade levels for 26-27. We're not able to account for, in our methodology, enrollment, community changes, population changes. We also can't account for all the magnet and choice offerings that exist in the district. The only one we've accounted for, really, is Spring Hill High School, because it has such a significant impact on high school enrollment. So we have tried to account for that, and you'll see more about that. The enrollment data that we're providing is as of January 3rd. We wanted to provide the most recent data that we could. And we are so far from the 45th day of the school year that we felt it was appropriate to make sure we were using the most recent information that we could in this situation. The very first thing we looked at was the elementary school enrollment. Now, we haven't included every elementary school in the district here because the only elementary schools impacted from an enrollment standpoint by the initial draft of Educational Structure 3 are the Chapin area elementary schools, because they're the schools that are currently K-4 or pre-K through 4. And what we can see is that if we add a grade level to those schools, the enrollment is obviously going to increase. And for Chapin Elementary School, it would take their enrollment, based on our methods of calculation, somewhere between 938 and 956. For Lake Murray Elementary School, it would take them between 931 and 956. And for Piney Woods, somewhere between 646 and 654. That's if we added in another grade level that's the average size of the current K-4 grade levels, or if we added in a grade level that's the size of the largest grade level. So immediately we have an issue with the significant enrollment at 2 of our Chapin area elementary schools. We applied the same methodology here to look at middle school enrollment. Okay? So you can see Chapin Intermediate, the future Chapin Middle, Chapin Middle, future Spring Hill Middle, Crossroads Intermediate, the future Crossroads Middle, Dutch Fork Middle, and Irma Middle. And you can see we provided the 45th day enrollment from this year. We provided the greatest total enrollment from the last 5 years, and then we said if you apply the new logic of how our feeder schools would work under Draft Educational Structure 3, you can see what the enrollment would be for 23-24. And so the middle schools don't really have an issue from an enrollment standpoint. They all come back, though they're not balanced, they do come back kind of within a range that we might expect. You can also see the percentage of students who are pupils in poverty and how that's distributed across those schools. High schools, we have a different issue. Okay, if you look at Chapin High School, you have 2,556 students who are zoned for Chapin High School who are in grades 9 through 12 under Draft Educational Structure 3 with no other changes. Of those, 562 students are currently attending Spring Hill. So we remove them and you're down to 1,994 students, which is still more than 300 students greater than what they currently are serving as of the 45th day of the school year. And you can see if we looked at 24-25, 25-26, and 26-27, what that would look like. Dutch Fork High School, of course, declines in enrollment as part of this, and Irmo High School stays the same as nothing changes there. The next slide shows the percentage of students who are pupils in poverty in each of those zones based on those new lines. So the consequence of draft educational structure with no other changes is that the enrollment at the Chapin area elementary schools is going to increase significantly. Chapin High is going to increase significantly, and draft 3 is also going to bring down the enrollment at Dutch Fork High School. And you might wonder, why are some of those things happening, especially at Chapin High? It's because we're adding an entire feeder school to it. We're adding Ballantyne Elementary School, which is under draft 3, moving from the Dutch Fork cluster to the Chapin cluster. And you can see the current Ballantyne lines here labeled with a star. It's a significant portion of our district, kind of a vertical line right down the center of the district. And so when we see that increasing enrollment at Chapin High School going to 2,556 zone students, it's because you're essentially looking at the Piney Woods, the Chapin, and the Lake Murray and the Ballantyne zones all feeding in. So what are the consequences of that? Well, if you're to move forward with the adopted grade structure and something similar to that feeder system, you'd have to consider multiple solutions. One of those solutions are portable classrooms. One solution is new construction. Another solution, and that's what we're looking at here tonight, is redistricting. Okay? How could we redraw attendance lines and remake our school assignment plan to find a way to make that work? And that's what we're looking at here. Now, I'm going to continue with draft educational structure 3 for a few slides as we work through what some rezoning options might look like under draft educational structure here, or draft educational structure 3. The intention there is to show you the math of how we got to draft educational structure 4, to show you the solutions we tried, that ultimately we had to consider other options to get there. We're going to again focus on elementary. And the goal here in these solutions that we looked at in the next couple slides, we wanted to prevent the overcrowding at Chapin and Lake Murray elementary schools that were going to be caused by adding one more grade level. We want to prevent overcrowding at Chapin High that's caused by the additional feeder school, and we want to temporarily delay the need for new construction in Chapin. We use the same limitations as before. We can't control in our roles and our data that we have for what might happen with the community, different population changes, new developments, new housing. We're strictly looking at the students who are currently enrolled in the district and what that might look like as we move forward. When we do that, we're going to be looking at the elementary school assignment plans, and then we're going to be looking at potential modifications to the middle school assignment plans. As Dr. Ross mentioned, one of our priorities here too was to keep as many students at their zoned high school as possible. So if you're zoned for Chapin High, trying to keep you at Chapin High, zoned for Dutch Fork, trying to keep you at Dutch Fork, and if you're zoned for Irmo, trying to keep you at Irmo. There were some exceptions to that, and we'll get to those in just a second. The key exception, I should say the key exception, the only exception really is the students who are directly next to or very close to in proximity to Ballantyne Elementary School. Because Ballantyne is shifting from the Dutch Fork cluster to the Chapin cluster. That means the building itself is moving to the Chapin cluster, and there are neighborhoods directly around Ballantyne Elementary School that necessitates it moving, those neighborhoods moving into the Chapin cluster as well. That's the only real change that we're going to see when we look at the high school lines. Here's our first scenario that we looked at here. You can see the redrawn lines. Significant impact here at Chapin Elementary School, which changes and takes up a significant portion of up to the border with Newberry and up to the river. You can see Lake Murray Elementary School's attendance line changes as well. It's currently one of our largest attendance lines, one of our largest attendance areas, and so it's come down a good bit here. And you can see Ballantyne also grows a bit. It was that center portion of the district, and on this map, you can see that it goes up to the river now and expands into what was the Lake Murray attendance zone. Another change you'll see is that Oak Point expands into what was formerly Ballantyne's zone. River Springs expands into what was formerly Ballantyne's zone. Dutch Fork Elementary is going to expand a little bit into Ballantyne's zone, and H.E. Corley expands into that zone as well, because we're needing to move as many students from the Ballantyne zone into the Dutch Fork zone for high school purposes in order to prevent the overcrowding that it would cause at Chapin High School. When we look at that, you can see the general balance of enrollment. We've got a range there. Lake Murray Elementary School ends up at 801 students, followed by Chapin Elementary School at 736. That's column 3, number of students zoned to attend the school in scenario 1. And you can see the range from there follows. Ballantyne is going to increase in enrollment up to 703 students. And you can see the other schools and what their enrollment would be. Major note there, we're looking at K-5 in column 3, haven't accounted for pre-K. In these numbers here, we're looking at just the K-5 students who would be zoned for those schools. If we go to the middle schools, you can see a different issue. Okay, so while we were able to better balance the enrollment in the elementary schools with those changes, the middle schools are looking okay as well. You end up in column 3, you've got 717 students zoned for what is now Chapin Intermediate, will be Chapin Middle under the plan. 825 zoned for Chapin Middle, which would be Spring Hill Middle. Crossroads and Irmo end up much smaller, but the major issue you see here is Dutch Fork Middle School increasing to 1,245, and then every other year that we modeled out would be 1,100. Now, I said earlier, we're not intending to do projections, but I can tell you that one area we do, we don't see that kind of decline every year is Dutch Fork Middle School specifically. We actually see those numbers tend to increase a little bit, especially with their 7th grade group. So even though you see a kind of a decrease there over the 3 or 4 years, that wouldn't be what we generally see with their enrollment. So that's just a note there too about that piece. But the key issue from this slide in our middle school analysis was while we may have solved the Chapin area elementary school issue or brought it down to be a little bit more manageable, we created a new issue, which was Dutch Fork Middle School's enrollment. High school enrollment, again, brought it down to be a little bit more manageable. Chapin High is larger, obviously, because it's adding some students. It's now at, if you look, we've got 2,199 students who are zoned for the school, but of those 2,199, 479 are attending Spring Hill. So if we've removed them, we're at 1,720, which is, again, an increase over where we are today, or where we are on the 45th day of the school year, but it is not quite where we were in the original scenario, the 2,500 students who were zoned for Chapin High School. You can see the Dutch Fork impact, again, smaller than it is today. That's due to some of the factors we've already described, and then Irmo High remaining roughly stable. Yes. I have the 45th day enrollment. I can provide that. It's around 1,100 students. The intention would be to keep it under these. We're assuming the same parameters are in place for Spring Hill, that it's going to remain accepting roughly 300 students per class per year, so a maximum enrollment there of 1,200 under this. That we haven't changed any other rules with that. Okay. And to clarify with your question there, we're then assuming that roughly 21.8% of the students in that Chapin zone would be attending Spring Hill going forward, so that when you see the 1718 or the 1715 or the 1645, that's with 21.8% removed, or 16.6 at Dutch Fork, or Irmo High having 19.4. We've attempted to remove out what we anticipate that number be. If it was to hold relatively steady over the next 3 years, that's what it would look like. Okay, thank you. And then you can see the poverty levels at the 3 high schools, excluding Spring Hill, which is of course the all-magnet school. And you can see what the enrollment would be, or the percent of pupils in poverty would be at those schools. We then considered, after looking at that and noting the issues that we saw at Dutch Fork Middle, even though we solved some of the other problems that we anticipated, we then looked at an entirely different scenario. We looked at what would happen if we expand the Piney Woods zone. Okay? Expanding the Piney Woods zone gives us some other opportunities. It allows the Chapin Elementary zone to grow a little bit more and absorb more of the Lake Murray zone. And it allows a few other changes to take place. Again, this is an attempt to better balance the enrollment from some of these changes. We did that. It actually brought the Lake Murray and Chapin zones down a good bit and made it a little bit more manageable again there. But that's because we're increasing the enrollment at Piney Woods there. Everything else was kind of a trade-off with those pieces in terms of trying to balance enrollment. You can see we still have the same problem at the middle level. Again, that's because the middle level pieces didn't change here when we ran this analysis. We still end up with 1,245 students at Dutch Fork Middle and remaining above 1,100 in every other year. And the issue there is that we anticipated, or the greatest enrollment from the last 5 years was 1,038. So we're talking about a significant number of additional students caused by this kind of shift. So scenario 2 didn't help us with that piece. Scenario 2, the high school numbers here are roughly the same as we mentioned. The high school numbers aren't changing because we're not trying to change any of the high school attendance lines as part of this, okay? But like scenario 1, scenario 2 has the same issue as, that we identified, which was we're addressing the issues we set out to address, which were reducing enrollment at the Chapin area elementary schools, balancing the enrollment there, and reducing the enrollment at Chapin High, but inadvertently creating an issue at Dutch Fork Middle. And so that's what led us really to scenarios 3 and 4. And that's also draft educational structure 3 and 4. So we took the same lessons we learned from scenarios 1 and 2, and we said, what if we applied them to a new model where we tried to address what's happening at Dutch Fork Middle? Okay, keep the same concept where we've got the schools feeding into that high school. And what you're going to see on the next few slides are what happens when we take scenarios 3 and 4, which are essentially scenarios 1 and 2, but with some modifications to the middle level, since that's the inadvertent problem that we created here. To give you some sort of parallel here, scenario 3 is actually the same elementary school attendance lines as scenario 1. Scenario 4, same attendance lines as scenario 2. Okay? High school assignment plans don't change. Okay? That's the same thing we just looked at there. Okay? So nothing's going to change there. The focus here on scenarios 3 and 4, taking the same attendance lines you already saw for scenario 1 and 2, and let's apply that to the middle level instead. So this is the same map we saw earlier for scenario 1, okay? And what we're going to look at here is what would happen if you apply scenario 1, but we use scenario 1's attendance lines, but we use draft educational structure 4. So this is H.E. Corley moves to Crossroads. And you can see what that does is it brings Dutch Fork's enrollment down to 908, and every other year somewhere around 800 students. It increases the Crossroads enrollment. The move also increases the Irma Middle enrollment. That's because Harbison West was split under the previous plan. And here it's not split. It's all going to Irma Middle. And that's what you'd be looking at there. So scenario 3 effectively addresses that issue, but it has the same limitations as scenario 1 did. When we go to scenario 4, again, that's the same elementary school attendance lines as scenario 2. Same lines as scenario 2, not changing anything else. So here you can see the Piney Woods expansion, followed by the Chapin Elementary School expansion, and the reduction at Lake Murray in terms of their current footprint. And what we get to there is an even closer balance between Chapin Intermediate and Chapin Middle. Those two get even closer together in terms of enrollment. And then we can also see that the Dutch Fork Middle School enrollment remains right where we saw it on the previous slide. Again, the increase at Crossroads, and a minor increase there, Irma Middle, from where it would have been under scenarios 1 and 2. So our findings there, if you go with something like scenarios 3 and 4, you're going to be able to reduce the potential enrollment caused by adding a grade level at Chapin Elementary and Lake Murray Elementary. You'll be able to reduce the impact of adding an additional school to the feeder system at Chapin High, and you'd also be able to prevent the increase potentially at Dutch Fork Middle that's caused by adding 6th grade to that school. So scenario 4 emerged as the recommendation that we felt best fit draft structure 3 and the needs of the district. Again, implementation of drafts 3 and 4, there's no way to do those things without some rezoning. Those things have to take place, or you're looking at portable classrooms in some cases, or new construction. Redistricting scenarios 1 and 2 that we showed you earlier. Those effectively deal with some of the issues we noticed created by not doing anything, but they don't address the overcrowding at Dutch Fork Middle. And scenarios 3 and 4, we feel like address all of those issues. And scenario 4 is the recommendation of the administration. This time I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Ross.
Before we go to questions, Madam Chair, members of the board, I just wanted to outline our discussion with a timeline. We provided a proposed facilities planning timeline. Our goal in terms of is to meet a lot of objectives, the rezoning, the facility issues, the capital issues, but also the certification issues of moving staff from elementary to middle, to make sure that we had all of our programs adjusted. And so with that, we have set an implementation of this rezoning plan for 2026, the 2026-2027 school year. Why is that important? In our recommendation, we require a new building. With averaging 18 months of building or construction time, that would mean to make this happen, we would be breaking ground next year this time. With the prep work that's needed before breaking ground, you need another 6 to 8 months of planning prior to that. We have a bond resolution coming up in April. We would like to align that resolution with our 5-year plan. So that puts us in having a decision of the board in March of do we accept this plan as our 5-year plan. So in the process between now and then, the administration will continue to do feedback sessions with our community, with our school groups, our SICs, and different stakeholders within the community. But I just wanted to just share what a potential timeline would look like. While it seems like a long time away, with all of the moving pieces that we have, it really is not. So with that, we will pause and field questions.
Okay, any questions? Ms. Huddle?
I don't really have a question as much as I guess a request. I feel like we've kind of jumped a step here in that, like one of the slides, I think that the proposition was, do we address the overcrowding or build a new school in Chapin, or do we fix and fill? And I don't feel like we've really, I mean, I'm hoping it's not an either or for one thing, but I feel like we haven't really addressed our situation and our priorities. And I know we can't like do that right this minute and take a vote right this minute, but I would like to suggest that as part of maybe our next board meeting, we do that. And I think it's going to be easier for the community to understand what may be needed as well if we first can get agreement on what are our priorities. Just for example, they've been discussed, but we don't have a list per se that we've agreed on. Is it addressing overcrowding? Is it addressing the middle school alignment? Is it addressing the facilities that need some work to get up to speed with health and safety? So that's just a suggestion I would make. This is very confusing for me without having that groundwork done. The other thing I would like to do is request that we add capacity on here. A couple years ago when we looked at this, we did have capacity on this, and I know it's helpful to know what the 5 greatest years were, but for all we know, that was a lot less than whatever the capacity is for a school, or a lot more than what, so I think we really need to have the capacity amounts listed on here as well. And I do have a question, so I do have a question, and that is, I know there's a reason, but I'm not sure why the percentage for pupils in poverty are on here, so, and maybe that goes back to what our goals are as well, so I would just ask, what's the significance of that?
Well, one of the things that we shared, and as we did our reports, we talk about the impact, and we see that in the data. There's an impact between the number of students in poverty you have in the school and its academic performance. We see that statewide. In fact, I think we looked at data, and with 65.5%, if you tell me with accuracy, if you tell me, looking at Dr. Holden, if I'm wrong, you tell me the poverty of a community, I can tell you the performance, 71% accuracy. You tell me the poverty of a school, we can see statewide now, its academic performance. We try to balance that. It has significance when we look at our Title I allocations. Right now, we know that we have them all in the elementary schools, so that's important. It also, as we look at providing resources for students in poverty, that's important to know where those shifts are in terms of academic or what we do in terms of nesting schools and providing those. So just in the role of supporting schools, supporting children, supporting families, it's important to always keep an eye on those impactors. I also like to say as we do this, the goal is to start the conversation today, so we're welcoming any feedback that we can get today that would help us in making a informed decision.
Okay. And yet, Mr. Scully, and then I'll come to you, Mr. Satterfield.
Yeah, a couple of questions, and one will be a follow-up to what you just talked about, Dr. Ross. But first, as it relates to the options, A, B, and C, you're recommending B. My question is, if we did B, what would the timeline or the time frame, what does that buy us from a timing standpoint in both as it relates to building maintenance and conditions as well as future zoning? In other words, if we go with B, which is the middle option, the middle budget, how much time does that give us before we have to take the current buildings that are in condition 3 and 4 and do the same thing again to them? And also zoning, because zoning's a big thing as well and very unsettling. How much time does option B buy us from a zoning standpoint as well before we really have to go back and reconsider it? And did you compare that to what would that look like in comparison to option C, for example, where yes, it's the highest amount of money, but also economically $1 today is worth more than it would be tomorrow. So we'd kind of get a bigger bang for our buck theoretically today if we went with that. Would it buy us enough? Does the benefit of doing that, does it buy us enough time on those other two issues? So if I've got one more question I'll come back to, but if you'll address that. And you don't have to have an answer to those today, I'm just raising it.
No, if Mr. Wiseman wants to chime in where I err, he can as well. But what we're looking at in terms of option B really was our capacity to do a lot of different things at once. Rechange our grading structure, move students and staff with the rezoning, and also start with our most needy facilities at the same time. We recognize that these would have to be phased in as we set priorities. There are certain things that we could handle in our level ones of those 7,700 instances that we need to start handling through capital. Without a full phase of all of those, which we're working, we met with MPS before the break, so they're helping us with that phasing of those projects, but they would like to do it in totality so that we're not buying something that could be financed in a different way and wasting that money today. So part of us of this is as we bring back from here to March these questions, we'll have more and more data about how that phasing would look.
Okay, thank you. And then just touching back on the poverty discussion, looking at it, obviously, I don't want Crossroads to get lost in the shuffle here. And in every scenario, the poverty percentage is vastly much higher for Crossroads specifically than everyone else. I know we're having to balance capacity issues with that in that consideration, but is there anything that can be done? Because it does relate, there is a correlation to performance, and we're already seeing the challenges that Crossroads has, but currently they're feeding from more schools, so their challenges today are much different than they perhaps would be in the future, but the poverty percentage is still high. And what can we do to help them if we go with this scenario, knowing that they're facing those percentages of poverty, what can we do to offset that?
That's a good point. One of the things is we considered this. I think in our initial draft and deliberation, it was much higher. And I was not a fan of busing or anything like that, but using natural zones in order to do our feeders to get balanced. But by bringing H.E. Corley in, I think we were able to kind of get a better balance in the poverty. The other thing is the number of students that you'll see it's not in the 900s that you'll see at the other two. But I believe that under the right, and I use the NEST philosophy, but under the right supports, all children, regardless of background or position, will succeed. This allows us to better utilize our resources to surround and wrap around the Crossroads School. We will also talk about options for our magnet flows and academic programs that we're excited about coming that way. And so I think with the right supports, not pulling from, because we can see the growth that they do pulling from 10 schools. So pulling from 3 schools, and you can go and map back all the way to kindergarten, your students, and support them all the way up. It will put our Crossroads teachers on even par to compete despite the poverty.
And just real quickly, this is things we can even start doing today, but have we considered from a resource standpoint allocating additional staffing? And I know ADP, our assistant principals, are very helpful in that regard. Have we considered anything along those lines?
We have begun. I'm not going to put Dr. Turner on the spot there. We have begun looking at first to make sure that we have the right certifications, programs, and so taking this time to 2026, we want to make sure if you're not certified elementary, but you're going to elementary, that we're paying for that certification. If you're not certified secondary and you're going to a secondary, that we've taken care of that as well. So we'll start with staffing level on the classroom level first and program and then supports. But we do have, and Dr. Turner can correct me if I'm wrong here, we are looking at, for instance, when Crossroads goes to a middle school, it takes on sports, right? So it then would require its sports program. It takes on the full complement of arts. So it needed all of a full complement of arts programs. So there would be parity and equity between staffing of all those programs. Dr. Turner, if I missed something.
Mr. Satterfield.
Wrong button. First, thank you, Mr. Scully, for that. Actually, Dr. Ross and I had quite a lengthy conversation about that very thing. When I saw the numbers with regards to the poverty index and the numbers, when I was involved with schools, I told people I can put 35 kids in an AP classroom, but if you have a class of struggling learners, you can try to keep those classes small and provide as many resources. So, Mr. Scully, a lot of what you were asking were some of the same concerns that I had, and I know that Dr. Ross is forward thinking and we'll look into that. One of the questions that I did have, well, I had a couple questions, but one of them was, how about assignment of special education programs? Will that change any, and is there consideration being given? I know there's consideration being given, but I did want to ask that question.
Dr. Slatton and I have just been talking about that. So yes, we are looking at various programs and how students are being served and how they could be served differently. So there's lots of conversations that are taking place and how even zone schools can possibly serve their own students versus having students that have to go different places. So we are looking at a lot of different possibilities with hopefully everyone moving 26, 27, let that be the one time when there could be movement that would take place.
Well, thank you for that. I know that, like you said, I know that in the past, there's been more of moving students to the school which means a lot of times out of their attendance area, out of their zoned area where their friends or their family members are sometimes, because that's the only place where the program is housed. So I hope that that's something that we can be forward-looking, especially with so many children that are being identified with autism. And I was talking with one of the principals, and she was talking about the ways that she was dealing with those particular students. And so I think that's really something that's important for us to plan for. One of the other questions that I had, Dr. Ross, was I noticed in the different scenarios, Dutch Fork Middle School was up in the 1,200 range. That's a lot of middle schoolers. Now, the one scenario, though, had them back down to around the 800, 888. Was that correct? Yeah. Now, what is the school designed for? I mean, what's the capacity of? Does anybody know for Dutch Fork Middle School? You know, Ms. Huddle?
I was looking at that while we were talking, and a couple years ago, Malone and McBroom did a report. It's online, and according to it, and this is actually not capacity, it's targeted enrollment, which is less than capacity. The report didn't put capacity, but the targeted on that report was 1149.
Okay. I know that years ago there was a lot of emphasis placed on the middle school model and trying to keep those numbers, but that's a difficult time for kids, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And my last question I had was back to Spring Hill. I know that Dr. Ross and I had a brief discussion on this as well. It seems to be our sort of I know that it's a school of choice, a magnet school, but it seems to be our sort of a spillover school. It takes the extra kids out of the Chapin area or some of the other schools. I know that y'all have had a lot of discussions about this. Would it be prudent to think about assigning an elementary school to Spring Hill High School?
So, yeah, there's been discussion about what we call zoning Spring Hill, and that's not something I'm in favor of right now. I think there's a future where that's going to end up happening. We won't have any options. Right now, Spring Hill is academically, as a magnet school, a national leader in magnet high schools.
Right.
And so its choice and its programs are coveted by a lot of people in our community, and I want to preserve what has been built there at Spring Hill. Our goal by moving the Academy of Success out of that building into the Rich Lex building, what we propose to be called the Rich Lex building, would be to free up more seats for Chapin Zone students. And then by working with Spring Hill Middle, and you know this is a principle, you can identify groups of students that would be in a Spring Hill Academy at the middle school. So by going to Spring Hill Middle, being in that academic academy that they create, you can almost predict the attendance that would draw down from Chapin into that new space. What this does is bring up a good point, though. In our plan, we don't decrease the Irmo and Dutch Fork seats. We just increase the Chapin seats.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Hogan.
Thank you. So with the fix and fill option, and I appreciate Ms. Huddle bringing up, bringing more information to us, will we get a list of the schools that we intend on fixing and filling, and within prioritization to what is the most important school? If this referendum passes, this is where the first dollar is going to this school, and once that's complete, this school, to where we can see just exactly what $240 million potentially could impact?
So currently, correct. That's our plan between now and March to bring that. We'll meet again with MPS. We have some initials, but as the administration, we want to go over them and those estimates. Again, the 240 is based off of the 15-year financing. We also want to bring you what, I'm sorry, Ms. Wilkinson, if you can share some other options that we have as well, so that not only are we prioritizing the projects, but prioritizing some financing options there. So you just kind of speak to what would give us some more flexibility.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Ross. So as he mentioned, the 240 that's shown on the slide is really just our debt capacity number. It doesn't contain any cost estimates because at this time they're still working through that. So, when we get a number back, it could be 240, it could be 500, million. We're not sure what that number will look like at this time. So, some options that we've just talked to our bond counsel and our financial advisor about are, different financing options. So right now, what we've looked at is the 240 would be our capacity at 69.5 mils for a 15-year financing term. And we would do that we would issue the bonds over a 3-year period, roughly 60 million or 80 million each time. And then he's also looked at some scenarios where we actually extend the term of those to a 20-year financing option, which would create a little bit more of flexibility from years about 2030 on, in case there was some needs beyond the 240. Because again, that's just looking at our debt, not taking into account any cost estimates.
And if I could add, just a rough look at the numbers. 1s and 2s, which would be in our 2 priorities, we have over 2,645. So that's going to keep us busy. We got to go through there and kind of identify, of course, obviously the cost or at least the estimates and start working on those. But someone asked a question earlier, where would that put us in 2016, 2017? We can start working toward the 3s and the 4s, which by then they'll be close to a 2. So you're talking about 4,000 specific items throughout the schools. And our focus just on, if you look at just sheer numbers, some of our schools like Dutch Fork High School, even Chapin High School, Crossroads, have the higher numbers of 1s and 2s. So those are the things that we'd be focusing on.
Anyone else? I have some questions, and it might just be kind of talking through some of what everyone has said. Ms. Huddle mentioned talking about putting something on a future agenda to address priorities relating to overcrowding and middle school alignment and facilities and prioritizing that. And I guess in my mind, I struggle with how we necessarily prioritize it because it seems like it's all like together. So addressing all of those issues, they all play off of one another. So it's not like it needs necessarily a vote. It's trying to, when we get to the point where we decide this is what we want to present for the bond resolution, like that's the vote. But for right now, when we're having conversations, I guess I'm struggling on like how we prioritize. Like if we just prioritize one over the other, it kind of throws everything out of whack because it's all together. But there's a lot of information and a lot of moving parts to all of this, so it makes it a little confusing, to your point. I get that. So I'm trying to figure out like what that conversation looks like, and what that conversation looks like. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, and I probably wasn't clear enough. I wasn't really saying to take those items and prioritize them. I was just saying to come up with what our priorities are. So I think we all kind of know because we're talking through it, but just put it in black and white, because unfortunately I feel like one of the slides kind of came across as a choice, like a choice to address what's happening with enrollment in Chapin or a choice to fix our schools, and I don't know that we have that choice. I think we have to do
I think it's
both
all together.
of them.
I guess I look at this and I think that maybe options were given, but really the recommendation is that last one because every element is important. I might be...
Well, I guess, okay, so one option is that I didn't really see in there was we have neighborhoods that are currently zoned for Chapin High School that are physically closer to Dutch Fork High School.
Which is also interesting because this plan, it seems like a lot of the neighborhoods that are around Dutch Fork, like Ballantyne, like now will all go into Chapin, but Chapin is overcrowded.
Yes.
So it doesn't really logically make sense why that would happen. Does that make sense, Dr. Ross? Like, to me, in order to get to alleviate some of the overcrowding in Chapin, why would we put more students in Chapin?
I think, let me try to make it plain.
Is that-
We need direction from the board, because any option we draw takes a lot of manpower to put these together. So the question is, we're operating with the assumption of a new building. If there's no appetite for that, we need to stop here and then start looking at some different options with our existing buildings. So when I say that there is a direction, we have to at some point address the growth in Chapin. And I think that's the kind of some ground rules we have to understand. Is there unsustainable growth in Chapin? I think it's very clear there's unsustainable growth in Chapin. So how do we handle it? This option was our recommendation for how to handle it. So the rezoning factor was to really maximize a building that sits in Chapin, which is Spring Hill. So that's where we can pick that up. I think the important thing to the points that were made is our intent today is not to have a decision. It was to gather questions that we can go back and further research so that we can put together something that you are ready to make a decision on. So I would suggest that we can gather questions over the next month so that the administration can know. But I think at some point we have to determine what direction are we going so that we can get those detailed, drawings on whatever direction the body wants to go in.
So, Dr. Ross, I think where I get confused in this is I keep hearing, like, what we know we need is a new building. That new building being Dutch Fork Elementary. I agree that we need a new Dutch Fork Elementary. But when we're talking about the lines where the Chapin cluster is, and we're talking about the lines off of the Peak exit, which is where a lot of those, those schools are, there's the Ballantyne Elementary School that feeds into Dutch Fork, that we're now saying would feed into Chapin, and we're changing to the middle school model. I am having a hard time connecting how Dutch Fork Elementary impacts enrollment at Chapin High School or Chapin Middle School, where those schools don't impact Chapin now. I mean, Dutch Fork Elementary School does not impact the enrollment in Chapin, the Chapin cluster, especially the schools that were having capacity issues. So when I hear like the priority is to add one new building, it is hard logically to follow how that impacts the overcrowding in Chapin. Does that make sense? And I understand the thought process, and I'm going to kind of recap it so I know that I'm understanding it correctly, that when we go into the middle school model and we have a Spring Hill Middle and we have a Chapin Middle School, that the intent would be that there would be a program in the new Spring Hill Middle School where students would naturally funnel into the Spring Hill High School, and that would help alleviate enrollment numbers at Chapin High School, because those Chapin Middle School, Spring Hill Middle School students would want to stay close and go to Spring Hill High School in a magnet program. My concern is, what if you don't have 300 students from Spring Hill Middle School that want to go to Spring Hill High School, and then they want to go to their zoned high school, which is Chapin High School, and you still have the enrollment issues? Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. All right, so we have to solve three levels of problems. And so problem number one is going to be at the elementary level. Problem number two is going to be at the middle level. Problem number three is going to be at the high school level. How does Dutch Fork Elementary solve these problems is the biggest question. Remember, we're taking our existing buildings, and basically, we are shifting east. So with existing buildings, we're going to be shifting our students into the spaces that are allowed in the east. When we conceptualize Ballantyne, we conceptualize that as a Dutch Fork High School feeder. So the students that were currently in Dutch Fork, in Ballantyne Elementary, are no longer going to Ballantyne Elementary, so that we can shift east, right? Fixing the Pineywood tension, fixing the Chapin Elementary tension, fixing the Lake Murray tension, because we have this building of Ballantyne that we're shifting it east. By having a Dutch Fork Elementary School, we can maximize every space in Piney Woods by removing 5. At the middle school level, we are fixing the tension at the middle schools. Right now, Chapin, I don't know off the top of my head what the Chapin Middle School numbers are, but we can all agree that it is not sustainable in terms of, we're even looking at next year having some growth issues there. So by splitting the population of the existing Chapin students into 2 middle schools, we solve the middle school issue. At the high school level, we have 2 programs that are in our current high schools. Irmo High School is currently housing adult education, and Spring Hill High School is currently housing the Academy for Success. That has a wing of a high school feeder that is being utilized. By building the Dutch Fork Elementary, the current Dutch Fork Elementary now takes in those programs, which gives us space in Chapin. So a Dutch Fork Elementary in the Dutch Fork Elementary zone gives us a whole wing of a building in Chapin at the high school level. So that's it's this eastward shift that we're creating. But bringing those programs out of Piney Woods, out of Spring Hill gives us that space in Chapin. The very valid point that you have, what if that we have those students at Spring Hill Middle who are in the program for Spring Hill High School but do not want to attend that feeder school when they want to go to Chapin High School? That presents what I feel would be the inevitable, which Mr. Satterfield talked about, which is bringing a cluster system in. Now, as we look at our priorities for facilities, our priorities have always been the fixing of our facilities, our rated 1 and rated 2 items. Once you start to make Spring Hill a full high school program, we at that point have to look at its athletic facilities, its arts facilities, and that would change the construction priorities for that. So it was our hope that in this transition, once these programs are up, you basically have a lead to see how many students do you have in that academy going to the Spring Hill piece. So I do want to say it's a very valid point. It was a hedge against the zoning of Spring Hill, but we wanted to give Dr. Lofton and Ms. Huckabee an opportunity to prove that that model could work while we slowly build out to maybe in the 10-year plan, and I don't want to scare anybody when you say it on TV, but of inevitably at one point that being the 4th cluster. Did that answer your question?
Kind of. I do have it kind of raised another question. So are you saying that the students currently at Ballantyne are going to be zoned out of Ballantyne, which would mean that students at Lake Murray Elementary are going to be split where Lake Murray Elementary students go to Ballantyne?
So, correct, if you would, currently, you can come to the podium if you want to clarify. If you're, what we're zoning, you are moving elementary schools. But students who are at Ballantyne now, except for those that are right around the school, those students are currently going to Dutch Fork. They will be going to Dutch Fork still, but they may be at Oak Point now or River Springs. So I'll let Dr. Holden kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, exactly. When we're looking at educational structures 3 or 4, with Ballantyne moving to the Chapin cluster, unless we want to add significantly more students, back to 2,500 zone students for Chapin High, we have to move some students from that Ballantyne zone out of the Ballantyne zone. So the first thing we did was we moved students to, for example, Ballantyne students moved to Oak Point, Ballantyne students moving to River Springs, to Dutch Fork Elementary School, and to H.E. Corley Elementary School. So we divided up the current Ballantyne zone. When you're looking at scenario 4, we've divided up the current Ballantyne zone into those 4 places, left a small portion of the existing Ballantyne zone, zone for Ballantyne. And then we took places like Lake Murray Elementary School, currently one of the largest geographic zones in the district, and divided that up a little differently. So part of Lake Murray's zone then goes to Ballantyne. Part of Lake Murray's zone then goes to Chapin Elementary School. Chapin Elementary School gives up part of its attendance zone under scenario 4 to Piney Woods Elementary School. Okay, so there's a variety of shifts that take place there in order to make that happen. But yes, you're correct in looking at it from the standpoint of some of these neighborhoods that are currently in the Ballantyne zone, the current Ballantyne zone, under scenario 4, would shift to a different elementary school. Those that remain at Ballantyne, those that remain in the Ballantyne, which is the area, again, right around the apple that you see, just south of 176, south of I-26, what we're looking at there is those students would then, where they're currently zoned for Dutch Fork High School, because their school is now moving to the Chapin cluster, those students would be rezoned to the Chapin High School zone, because again, their school and their feeder system.
Ms. Otto?
2 things that I would like to see us look at. One is the gentleman from Lexington County came here, and I think there was roughly 900 home sites in our district that were underway, and I believe the vast majority of them were in Chapin. And I don't know if this is something that maybe would fall under the demographers, but I think it would be very interesting if we could find out what age children we expect in those homes, because right now, the elementary schools are not overcrowded in the Chapin cluster. It's the high school. And it feels like it's because a lot of people move there between, maybe in middle school or whatever. So I don't know if there's a way to do that, but I think we need to try to figure out what ages are people moving. And then the other thing, I will just beg again, I really believe part of it is Crossroads. And if we could fix Crossroads sooner, we would keep more people in Irmo and Dutch Fork. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that, again, it's not the administration, the faculty is doing a great job. It's just the concept of 10 elementary schools feeding 1 grade that has a lot of people looking for alternatives. And I just feel like, I know we want to do it all at one time, but the sooner we can address that, I think the better for those children, and I think it might even take some pressure off of Chapin.
Any other? I would say one of the things that I would like to be able to see just in my hand as we move forward, Dr. Ross, would be, and Mr. Hogan touched on this, a list of what all of the projects would be, because some of the things that are a little bit different now than when we were talking about the bond, the first projects, the first go around, is now we do have the middle school realignment, eliminating the intermediate school models, which would put 5th grade back into the Chapin school clusters and would add some, changing schools in the Dutch Fork and Irmo clusters. So like seeing what those projects are in front of us in addition to having updated information with school capacity, and I know that capacity is one of those things that's like a little crazy, because just because you have 1,000 students, that doesn't mean that there's 1,000 seats. I understand that. But I believe Ms. Huddle asked for that addition. If we could have that information, that's helpful to kind of bring the whole picture together with us, in my thoughts. I mean, Mr. Satterfield?
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because I was thinking the same thing. One other piece to throw into this large puzzle that we're trying to solve is, I know that Ms. Wilkerson spoke, she said it could be 240 million, it could be 500. Is there, at what point in time will we have, I know, I've seen the color-coded, greatest need, and, red and yellow and green and blue, but any idea of cost for these projects? I think the public, before we go forward, would surely like to know that we have a pretty good idea, instead of backing into this, exactly for each of these projects, how much we're asking for and what we plan to spend the money on.
Correct. So to that point, to see what those projects are, those won't change. So what we provided to you on October 23rd, those are the projects and its priorities. What we're working on now is the cost estimation of those, and then given some buffer from, as Mr. Scully said, what the cost projections are now versus what they look like when they're bidded out. It could be two different things. And so our top-end number of 240 won't change, or less likely to change. The question is, what's the cost of these when they all come back? Some of the things, when we have to be realistic, when you look at pricing, some people give you a 30-day guarantee on that material. And then after that, the costs are subject to change. So we're putting those together. Our prioritization is, was it 2,645 items. That's going to be our priority. So so right now we're going through each one of those to get cost estimates. That way we can go to the voters and say, here these are. So we're going to use that NPS model provided to you on October 23rd as the priorities. I think just kind of putting it down to the top 2,645 would be the goal, but the reality is the problem is big. It's every building you go to, that principal is telling you, I need help, I need this taken care of. So we're trying to get some numbers behind it that would give us confidence that we can go at it.
Anything else? I would just say, just to everyone, I really hope that it's so important that we rezone correctly so that we don't have to rezone again. The kids in the Chapin cluster, there's several of them that are going to have been rezoned several times, because we rezoned when we built Piney Woods, and those kids are getting ready to get rezoned when they hit the 8th grade. And I would hate for something to change where they get into high school and we have to rezone a senior year because we didn't do the high school rezoning correctly. So being able to explain all of that as well, I think will ease some concerns, because I'm hearing a lot of concerns about the constant change in schools, and that makes it hard for families. And I don't want to lose folks from our district entirely because we can't either make up our minds or we don't have a clear plan, and there's just so much information that is really hard to do. I get that. I just want us to be conscious of that as we are moving forward. Ms. Barnhart.
No, I completely agree. I think, in a lot of these discussions, obviously, to Mr. Satterfield's point, even the cost of it, I work in the industry, so I understand that something that cost something 3 months ago might completely change or alter within 3 months from now, so I understand that's hard as well. And then, like you said, just to be able to make a firm decision so that we don't have to come back. I think I heard a couple comments, okay, well, if we do this, we might have to come back and do this later, and just so that we know that it's all going to be solid so that, like you said, we don't have to keep changing up. I think that's a good idea.
Dr. Ross, you want to close this out?
So to recap, we are to come back at, we would ask if we don't do another, put a place on the agenda to just kind of do updates of this in the regular meeting. Capacity numbers, the phases of the capital improvements, that's the 2,645, we're pricing, and our priorities of those projects. Looking at communities in the Chapin area that may attend the Dutch Fork area so we're not heavily reliant on the Spring Hill model to work. Were there others that I know we talked about poverty index, making sure that we were balancing poverty and the number of students.
Another thing I think that's important to kind of get a calendar out or an estimated calendar out is the community engagement and getting feedback before we go and make a definite vote. Because what I will say is, when you change things up constantly and you don't just have a firm plan, that makes it harder, it makes it harder for me to be able to get on board personally. I think we need to have a firm plan and get some feedback. And sometimes, there's going to be growing pains. Not everybody's going to be thrilled with the changes. And that's very unfortunate. So we need to be very intentional that we do this as, we get this as right as much as possible. But I think that part of that is getting out there and starting to talk to the community and getting community feedback so that if there is some glaring issue that we're not seeing or we're not hearing, that we might be able to address it before we get to, March, Dr. Ross, that you're trying to?
End of March, 1st of April.
Yeah.
Our goal is to maximize our capital funds, and this year's capital budget, I think, Skego, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so what we normally do each year is, if we're going to issue through SCAGO, which is only a short-term bonds, that's usually in May of each year. They do a fall issuance as well, but we usually try to get in under the May issuance. So kind of to backtrack from that timeline would mean that we would need to talk about those capital projects usually at the second meeting in February to, just as a discussion. Y'all would vote on those capital projects. The first meeting in March, we would bring the bond resolution to you the second meeting in March for a vote in April so that they could go on to the SCAGO bonds since we only have one meeting in April. So that's kind of, once we know what the firm deadline is, we can backtrack to see the timeline based on the board.
Go ahead.
Do we have to marry the two? Is there any reason we can't look at the capital needs in terms of the repairs and the items that were identified separate and apart from our challenges with enrollment? I guess I just don't want to see it one delay the other. If we know that we've got repairs to be made and we know that we have some debt capacity, why not? I just don't want to wait to make changes and address things that we have to.
I agree. I think for us, all we were saying is if we could align, so it's not waiting, but there's X amount of funds. Is it aligned in a larger plan, or we're just handling it this year's piece? So because for us, it's going to be all those ones, right? It's going to be all of those ones that we have around that we're aware of them. We know we have to address them, and now it's getting those priced out and go. So.
Do I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Hogan?
I'd like to make the motion to adjourn the board 5-year master facilities planning workshop.
A second?
Second.
Ms. Snipes, all in favor? And now.